I'm Steve Laffey, if you don't know, and I'm running for president of the United States of America. So just to get it out, if you don't know, some people don't know who I am or what I do. I'm a public school kid. I went to Bowdoin College. I'm the youngest one in my class at Harvard Business School. I was a direct admit, which is supposedly impossible. I was told it was impossible, which is why I applied. I was told it was impossible. So I got out at 24, spent most of my time on Wall Street, either at Payne Webber or Morgan Keegan. I was at 38, the youngest president, chief operating officer of a major investment bank in the United States of America. We sold the firm for $785 million. It was my idea. I was in charge of the sale to a $4 billion bank. I left and went to start a hedge fund in Stowe, Vermont. I had never heard of Colorado, that the mountains were taller. So I went to Stowe, Vermont. But I had this calling to go to Cranston, Rhode Island. I went. People thought I was nuts. The guys who wanted me to start a hedge fund, people wanted me to run another firm. And I became the mayor of an 83,000 person city that had gone bankrupt, to the lowest bond rating in America. In 3.5 years, the biggest turnaround in America's history happened in Cranston, Rhode Island. Any city, any state, 8-notch bond rate increase has never happened. It happened in Cranston, Rhode Island. And by the way, if the only judge of me running was Standard & Poor's, go read the report. It's like, this guy knows what he's doing. And I know how to put the right people in the right place and get to the, God gave me this thing. I just know how to get to the heart of the matter and solve it. And then what I do know how to do is convince other people that I'm right.
We have a special guest, former mayor of Cranston, Rhode Island, in my old neck of the woods of Rhode Island. He is running for the presidency of the United States. This is from former Mayor Stephen Laffey here on Fire Breather Rob. Mayor, thanks so much for coming on. This is an important race, an important time for our country, and I'm glad that you're going to take time to talk about your candidacy with the viewers and listeners today.
Yeah, I'm happy to go wherever you want. I truly believe that I have a unique background that the times call for. That's why I'm running. So we can get into that, but that's why I'm here. I've done, before I was the mayor, just so people know, I'm a kid from Cranston, come from the School of Hard Knocks in Cranston East. I went to Bowdoin College as the only kid in my family to go to college. I was at 22. I was at Harvard Business School. I worked in the financial field. I'm a financial expert. Helped run a financial firm. Came back and turned around Cranston. Cranston had the lowest bond rating in the United States of America, was 37 days from defaulting on its debt, was borrowing tax equivalent rates, 3-month money at 15%. And for the people in Rhode Island who would get this story, I used to walk around campaigning with a baseball bat saying, you know what? It's sort of like you lost 5 straight football games and Vinny shows up with a baseball bat. That's how bad it was, right? People are like, oh, wow, man, that's bad. So, but I taught the top finance course at the University of Rhode Island. So we have a financial problem. So I have a lot of other background too, education that we can get into, but my background is vast, and I think the times call for it. That's why I'm running.
Well, we have so many topics to bring to the table for the viewers and the listeners. If we don't get into all of them today, we'll definitely try to get you for sure back on this program to speak to these big issues that are surrounding the country. We have a lot of people listening around the country in these community radio stations, especially in the state of Florida. So we're going to kick that around on some topics related to the Southeast in general. But let's kick this around a little bit more. You did run, for people that don't know, in Rhode Island for U.S. Senate in a tough primary against the former senator, former governor, Lincoln Chafee. Obviously, he won that primary against you, but then he went on to lose to Sheldon Whitehouse. Then you did run in 2014 for U.S. Rep in Colorado, lost in that primary too. But your big race obviously was Senate. Why do you feel like this is the right time to run? You did talk about, you're the financial guy. We're in very deep doo-doo with that. But, you've ran so many races. Why do you feel like this is the right time to run?
Well, one, back to 2006. Remember, we were very successful in Cranston, turning the city around in the quickest time it ever happened in U.S. history. So a city that was on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. So when that was fixed, the city pension assets up 500%. We could bore people all day, but the city financially was fixed, right? And I won a bunch of union battles and sued the school committee members for $1 million personally to make them balance the budget. We won the big Carullo lawsuit, lots of lawsuits, unfortunately. But the U.S. Senate race, one of the things people should know is I'm not just showing up and having been through the battles. I did not run effectively against Lincoln Chafee.
Lincoln Chafee is far to the left of Nancy Pelosi on issues. He's a pro-partial birth abortion Republican, whatever that means, right? When asked about illegal immigration, his answer was along the lines of, there's a vast expanse of space down there. I mean, it was bizarre. So in a Republican primary where only Republicans vote, I win 75-25. But in a quasi-Republican, quasi-open state, the National Republican Party disaffiliated 13,000 Democrats to be independents for one day. It's in my book. And he won by 3,000 votes. And the most widely turned out primary in Republican history in Rhode Island by a factor of 2. Like it's such a big primary to talk about. I got a big book deal about it. If you really want to read a good book about what happens with the establishment Republicans and how I fought against them, forget Link Chafee. It's called Primary Mistake through Penguin Books. And the reason I got a good book contract out of that race, in a sense, was that people knew that my race cost Republicans other races and lots of money. And without getting into, Allen lost to Virginia. It's old-time stuff. Let's not go to it. But Lincoln Chafee not only lost, he became a Democrat, just like I told Liddy Dole, who was the person attacking me, along with Karl Rove and President Bush and the late Senator McCain and so forth. And a great funny story I could tell you about Senator McCain, who I met later after he attacked me in that race. So I've been through the ringer. I mean, they spent millions of dollars spinning my head around, telling people I stole money, whatever, right? All of it lies, but it's not like I'm running like some guy just wandering in. I took on the National Republican Party, so I've been in big races. What happened in 2014, it was a special election. I could not get my name recognition across, and I made one critical mistake. I kind of thought the District 4 in Colorado looked somewhat like Rhode Island. It's the size of Virginia. I couldn't knock on every door in 3 months. I just couldn't do it. So anyway, but back to today, this is really setting up very well. I would much rather be where I am today as a small growth stock, in the breakdown lane, pulling on a left-hand blinker, getting my 2 tires on the first lane. Tonight, I'm on Scripps News nationwide. I just came off of Newsmax for the 6th time. I'd rather do that than watch Ron DeSantis burn coming from the 5th lane, hanging a right, burning and tearing the car over and setting it on fire. That campaign's over. So is Nikki Haley's, by the way. They're just over. They had no reason to run. I am running to directly confront the major problems. Social Security, no one else will touch it. I want to fix it. The Federal Reserve, no one will touch it. We need to change it. It's totally destroyed the middle class. Corruption. Whoever voted for the PPP program and took the money from all that stuff, like Governor DeSantis, like other people, Tim Scott voted, loved the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program. They're going nowhere. They're on the wrong side of history. That was $800 billion of massive waste. So there's only one person in the race who has my background, not just in finance, but in education and understanding healthcare and how to make the middle class thrive. That's me. That's why I'm running. So 06 was instructive in that not much gets to me.
No, and thank you for explaining that stuff. I was in LaSalle Academy at the time, so I didn't have extreme knowledge on what went on in that 06 race, but you explained it to me and obviously the people listening into our program today. I do want to talk about 2 topics with Rhode Island. We will get into the part of Cranston mayor a little bit more down the interview, but first of all, let's start about this 2010, obviously, that Obama was still in the White House. That was that Caprio, Chafee, crazy race that went on here in Rhode Island for governor. There was a lot of talk of you getting in that race as a Republican with Carcieri term limited. The Republican Party, Robitaille came in, but, since Carcieri left, it's been kind of a joke here in Rhode Island. There's been no good candidates, and no one even has a chance anymore to win a race.
And I told them that. I made a speech about it.
Is that right?
I made a speech. Wow. So I made a speech, and you can play it on the radio still. Sometimes when I get on WPRO, they play the speech. It goes like this. You really only want me when you have a financial crisis and you want to solve it. And the people of Rhode Island don't want to solve it. Cranston did. We fixed it. And the demographic data changed. And John Robitaille, yes, backed by the governor, announced in a basement and went nowhere and so forth. It was really just embarrassing. But I told the Republican Party, the leader, Gio Ciccione at the time, you only need to do one thing. You need to close the Republican primary to only Republicans like many states. And then we have a chance of winning. Because if you don't, and I run, we will have a whole nother situation in the primary. I had a mayor's primary, you might remember, against the husband of a crossing guard after we had fired crossing guards who made $129 an hour. This is all like, this could all be a show by itself, right? So I do still tell people, by the way, of a 401 area code friend, Rhode Island area code. I said, listen, if you want to know about me, you call 401, any number. Say, did you live there in 2002, 2006? Yes. What about Steve Laffey? They say, that's the guy who fired the crossing guards. And that's what people remember, right? It's, you know, it's a long, funny story about 4 years of lawsuits against crossing guards who made $129 an hour. But in 2010, they wouldn't do it. In fact, I said to them, I said publicly, when I leave, and I left and moved to Colorado, there will never be a statewide elected Republican in Rhode Island ever. So far, I'm correct. I said it publicly, and I said there's only one shot. We close the primary. I run as the Republican. If you do it, by the way, I'll run. I don't effectively have a primary because the Rhode Island primaries are very late, September. They can run anybody. I won't spend a dime. I'll get ready for the finals. They'll have a primary. They can't screw with our primary. We may win. We probably win. In Rhode Island, evangelical Christian conservative guy who's pro-life, it's kind of rough anyway, right? So, but that was the only way to win. But the Rhode Island Republican Party has never wanted to win.
And it's become a joke even worse since you left. I mean,
yeah. I've said, and by the way, many radio people, Dan York said this on PRO, they just need to close it down and start all over again because it's a joke. It's very unfortunate. It didn't have to be this way. Don Kachuri was the prime leader of the destruction of the Republican Party because he didn't go to events. He didn't do a good job. He left in disgrace, and that, you know, about the whole thing with Kurt Schilling.
Yeah.
And it was just disgraceful. So he should have run for the U.S. Senate when it was enough time demographically for me to win. And I suggested that to him. He didn't want to do it. And I said, Governor, secularly, you're John the Baptist. I'm the real deal. Like I'm going to take a whacking ball to everything. So he didn't like that idea. So I ran for the Senate.
Yeah.
So anyway,
well,
listen,
it
was good advice. I have good advice for people if they want it, but not many people take it. Anyway.
Mayor, since you left, it's been a joke. Between the Raimondo years, the Chafee, even before that, and now with Dan McKee, it's just a total joke. They're just pumping people. Look at, and I will end the topic on this: $3,000 to get the COVID-19 shot. State workers, $3,000. I mean, who can pass this stuff up? They're just giving away money. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame in itself, but it's a joke.
All you have to do in Rhode Island to know how bad it is to ride down Route 1A toward the beach and have to fix the steering on your car. The unions get all the money still, and the roads are the worst in America, and the schools are terrible. The whole thing goes on. So it just, and that's why I chose to live in Fort Collins, Colorado, to bring up my young children. I have 6, which gets at another thing about me. I get education. You know, my son Peter was at school with you when you were there. Then Peter Laffey for a couple of years.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
My son. He later graduated from Columbia, and I know if you knew him then, you might not guess this, but he graduated from Columbia University, double computer science economics. He's out in California running a big part of Match Group. He's doing very well.
You know, I want to talk about this. You know, you've been in New Hampshire, quite a lot within the past couple of weeks. With that said, how has been the reception of the campaign so far?
You know, I've been here more than a couple of weeks. I came here February 25th, and I've left a couple of times. My daughter's wedding, I went back to Colorado, but in fact, I'm here right now. I'm speaking to you from New Hampshire, and it's actually really taking off. At the beginning, I have to be very honest, it was very hard. Did a big thing on WMUR. I thought that would lead to other stuff. I think the governor kind of put out a kibosh on me, not just me probably, but people, because he was thinking of running. Yeah. People getting to speak in February, March to different groups. So that was hard. So I kind of went and met a bunch of individuals. Now it's expanding, and it's really because my message is so drastically different. You have Donald Trump running for re-election, and you've got a host of mini Trumps, people who backstabbed him. I mean, and I can see why he'd be upset. I mean, here's Vice President Pence. Did Nixon run against Eisenhower? No, of course not. I mean, so here's Trump. Mike Pence loves everything he does until one day, January 6th, he doesn't like it. Now he's running for president. Look at Chris Christie. Could anything be more hypocritical in a disaster? By the way, he'll go nowhere. One, he's a walking, talking disaster for healthcare. I mean, it's just it's crazy. It's really bad. Obesity is a giant problem in our country. And I know. Listen, I'm not trying to make fun of it. I'm just saying it's not John F. Kennedy running and putting in the physical fitness stuff, right? Plus, he destroyed the pension system. He leaves the New Jersey governor with a 14% approval rating, loving Trump, loves Trump. Loves Trump. We could put up 50 quotes. Oh, I love Trump. Trump can make fun of whoever, say he's going to grab women by the you-know-what. Oh, he's a good guy, he says. So now he wants to take him down, which would be impossible. So this is like the list of impossible people. How many practicing Hindus become president? Is Vivek? None.
He's just in there as a spoiler for Trump.
I don't even know who he's spoiling. He says he's a good friend with Trump.
I'm talking about spoiling DeSantis's chances against.
Yes, I guess. But DeSantis, well, I mean, all Trump does, and it's brilliant marketing by Trump. It's brilliant. He's Donald Trump. I have my problems about deficits, and I say when I disagree. But I'm not a never Trumper. I'm not like, oh, I hate him for everything he does. No, I like some of the stuff, that he tried to do and so forth. But judges especially, number one. But here's Ron DeSantis. All they're doing is playing ads of him loving Trump. There's a 2018 commercial where he's reading to a kid, "Make America Great."
We saw it.
It's over. These are things that are over. He should have just tried to be the vice president. Right. I mean, who advises these people? Every one of them I could give better advice than whoever's giving him advice. I'm not against it, but look at Nikki Haley. What is her reason for running? Quote, 100 times. You've heard this, maybe 100 times. She's the daughter of immigrants. Okay, whatever. She has a son or a daughter who's trying to buy a home and having problems doing so. That's okay. She's got another child who's at college, and the child is writing woke papers to get A's.
Oh, really?
Now, we Laffeys don't write woke papers. I got 3 kids in college still. They write the correct stuff. If the teachers try to screw with them, they see me. Oh, they're going to see somebody else. They're going to see a lawsuit. We don't do that to Laffey. So who would admit? We live in a world where people admit to things that are just bizarre. Right? I mean, it's just like, you wouldn't admit that was the case, but that is not a reason to run for president. The only person who seems to have a reason to run for president other than Donald Trump is me. I've got these 5 things I need to do. I've got to fix Social Security, modernizing it, making it stronger. So you, Rob, get it. Okay? Because right now, you're not getting it. No. Right now, whatever you're doing, however money people your age are making, when you visit a financial planner, they count Social Security at 0, right? I've got to stop the corruption like the PPP program, and I know how to do it. I've got to stop the Fed from inflation. We've got to have the Fed change its mission. It can only keep inflation at 0. The people on the Fed today should just simply resign. I mean, let's put it this way. I run a company and I'm off by a factor of 4 in what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm a salesman. I'm supposed to go do $1 million of gross business. I do 250,000. Do I keep my job? Of course not. I run a trading desk, which I did at Morgan Keegan. We made $6 million pre-tax the last year I ran it in a company that did $75 million pre-tax income. If I lost $6 million one day, I would have walked in with my resignation. Not the members of the Fed. They just keep talking, right? I mean, it's a clown show. But these are the things I have to stop in the public schools. Rob, you went to LaSalle. I went to public schools. I've educated 6 children in Montessori, public, private, Catholic, LaSalle for Peter for a couple of years. And I personally homeschooled the last 3 when my other daughter came down with cancer. The public schools cannot be fixed. Never. It's over. And so
And
we
I
get
also went to Catholic school before LaSalle in your neck of the woods of Cranston at CJCR. It's gone now, but that's where I was at for 8 years or 9 years.
of course.
Kindergarten.
I read to kids there. Yeah, I love that place.
Oh,
That
they
was a
read to
great place,
me.
by the way. Yeah, I used to read to a lot of kids till I sued all the school committee members personally, and then I didn't read to too many more when I was mayor. But see, I'm a man of action. Like, so I just do these things. So even as little old mayor of a medium-sized city, I had a checklist, and it'd be boop, 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 boop. I didn't do anything else. And take Cranston, for example. We had a very bad police station, had leaks of water. It was old. It kind of leaked. It was leaning. And as mayor-elect, before I took office, the 9-0 Democrats, they bought a piece of land that was inappropriate to put a police station on, but they wanted to just tell the police union they were doing a great job. I got out of the deal, went to the policemen, retirees too, and said, I will build you a police station, but not until the bond rating's investment grade. And they were like, they didn't believe me. Well, the bond rating went to investment grade, and I called the press conference the next day, and the old grizzly cops are like, oh, that guy Laffey. I built the police station. It was done before I left office, like I promised. That's what I do. I don't do anything else. I don't have 100 things to do.
I want to get into this because you are in New Hampshire a lot. I'm not sure where else you're going to as far as, but obviously the early states is Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. Sure. If you do somehow pull off a great upset or a great, second, third place, whatever it may be in New Hampshire, and really gain that momentum going into South Carolina, because it's very hard for somebody, I know you're working hard and you're on the ground, and New Hampshire's a New England state, and, they're a hop, skip, and a jump from Rhode Island. But the name recognition that these other guys had, and I agree that some of them are not ready for prime time, as you stated. Right. But regardless of that point, you're coming from a point as doing a great job as mayor. I give you kudos for that. But, you haven't been in office for quite a long time. So that name recognition isn't as big as somebody like a Pence or a Trump or a DeSantis, Haley. I'm not saying that I like any of these people, because I think a lot of them are a bunch of jokes, as you stated. But besides the point, it's very hard to get that name recognition out. So how are you kind of planning for this?
I became friends with Herman Cain, who in 2011 hit it big with the 999 plan. I became friends with him afterwards. I didn't know him until after the election. I met him in Colorado, spent some time with him in Atlanta. By the way, a lovely man. He passed away, unfortunately. Going to a Trump rally. He had cancer, but Herman Cain should have been president. He was a great guy. And I adored him. Just talking to him, I can remember my conversation. So he went through what happened to him and how he really took off and some of the mistakes he made. And he said, Steve, if you do this, which you should, this is what you got to remember. And so because of the internet, because of all these shows, because it can happen, and because, by the way, I'm not painted as a failed New Jersey governor. I mean, I'm not. When people go, let's say I do hit it big, what are they going to do? Complain about whatever in Cranston? I mean, the thing about me,
what they're going to do is, I'm going to tell you what they're going to do. They're going to complain about Social Security, and that you're going to say you're going to cut it. It might sound like a liberal. Yeah, but that's going to sound like a liberal attack maybe in your mind, but Trump's been pushing that he's not going to touch Social Security. Yeah. And even I'm hearing the DeSantis campaign saying the same stuff.
Yes, that's right. They do say that.
Well, they have to say it, especially in a state like Florida, because he'll get his ass hammered against the wall.
Here's the thing. I don't think so. This is how I'm different. Because of my vast financial knowledge, if you go to stevelaffey.com and look at the Social Security plan that I came up with, it's not really mine. There's a world leader in Social Security. His name is Larry Kotlikoff. He's my economic advisor. He's at Boston University. He's written books about this. So the people who are on Social Security in our plan, I took his plan. I'm not Alexander Graham Bell. I wish I was a great inventor. But one of the reasons you want me to be president is that when I became mayor, I adopted Rudy Giuliani's plans in New York City. I adopted the broken window theory. I fixed all the streets. We did new street signs. We took down the graffiti. I went and knocked on kids' houses who were doing graffiti. We arrested people for doing a graffiti, and the city got cleaned up. So I adopt the best practices of people that I admire, like, or do a good job in a certain issue. And that's what these people fail to do. DeSantis just copies Trump and wants to be president. Donald Trump on Social Security is financially immoral. It's totally wrong to say we can't touch it. It's $61 trillion. It's double the national debt is a problem. At stevelaffey.com, everybody who's on Social Security is going to get exactly what we told them. No old lady's not going to get what they're already getting. It's not going to happen. I'm going to do sort of what I did in Cranston to fix the pension system, but on a much different level. And so people who are 20 are going to be in a new system, which is invested in a worldwide basket of stocks, bonds, et cetera, real estate. They're never going to get to touch it, but they're going to own it. And by owning it, I mean they get to be 30, they die. Let's just say hit by a car. Their heirs get the money that's in the account. The feds don't keep it. They get married, by the way, at 30 to another 30-year-old. And at 40, they get divorced. They split it. If one way more, they put into that account. It's just the way it works. There's a lot of things we can do, but what happens over time, like in Cranston, is that the unfunded liability goes to zero. Now, that's extraordinarily important because of the dollar and how we've abused it. We've got to tackle these large problems to keep the dollar the world's reserve currency. That's extraordinarily important for young people and for our country, because other than that, we become Argentina.
Again, for people listening, Steve Laffey, he's the former mayor of Cranston, stevelaffey.com. He's got a movie out. You can check it out. It's Fixing America. That's on the website too. He's got a Substack too. Definitely check that out. We're going to tease that out at the end. Obviously, he's running for president of the United States. Steve, let's talk about this. You know, we got all these issues of people that heard you were coming on. They wrote some of these issues down that we wanted wanted you rather to speak about. Sure. So let's kind of run the gamut through these.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of touched on a little bit of these issues. Rather, I'll combine both of them together. You know, talking about well, let's start off with the national debt. The national debt is out of control. This isn't a Biden thing specifically. This goes Biden, Trump, Obama, and all the ways back to starting under Bush, where it got really out of control with Iraq and Afghanistan and the never-ending wars, which is where, and you ran as a populist in Rhode Island for elections, and this is kind of your wavelength, I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You know, getting rid of all this defense spending. Obviously, we want a strong defense, with that said, but regardless of that, we cannot keep trying to hop into these countries, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and try to save the world. You know, we have to, again, bring home the bacon. You talked about Rhode Island with the roads. They were a joke. We need to get this money, spend it, and make sure the money that's being spent by the federal government, there's results there. It's just not free money just being thrown out there. So can you explain to the viewers and the listeners what you would do as president of the United States with the debt crisis that's getting worse and worse and worse?
Yes. And so I made a movie about it in 2011. It's still up at Amazon. You know, as you mentioned, Fixing America. I travel the country. I talk to regular folks about China, the deficit, and about oil production. I actually talked to them about a lot of other things you don't see in the movie, like Social Security. But yes, the numbers look like this. George Bush becomes president, and he runs up $6.1 trillion of national debt in 8 years. Obama, $8 trillion in 8 years, and Donald Trump, $8 trillion in 4 years. So it's far worse under Donald Trump. And again, I thought he handled this whole stuff wrong with.
But was that because of the COVID crisis that the debt really rose under Trump in the 4 years?
Give him an extra $2 trillion for that, but in 4 years he would have run $6 trillion. So 4 years. So no. And so listen, anybody can keep the economy going. And by the way, under the Trump years, the economy grew at 2%, 2%, 2%, and -2. So here's the thing to really think about. And if you're an individual listening, when you personally have too much debt, you can't think straight. You can't get anything done. You're lying there at night going, I can't pay the mortgage. I can't do this. The federal government's acting like this. Now, when Reagan took on a good amount of debt to win the Cold War explicitly, to go to a 700-ship Navy, and then won, by the way, the Soviet Union collapsed. We handled it badly, the collapse of the Soviet Union, don't get me wrong. But a little bit of debt, when you have not much debt, can work and help growth. Now we get, and I say in the movie, 2011, once we get past $20 trillion of borrowed debt, which we're at 24, 25 trillion now, Some money we don't borrow, by the way, just not to get confused at the debt clock thing. Now we're at a really, 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 really bad problem, because when the Fed, again, I would change the Fed. This is what they allowed for 12 years. And Donald Trump, unfortunately, wanted more of those negative interest rates. But by keeping rates too low for too long, too many people bought too much stuff out into the future that now they don't need, like a home, like an extra car, like a boat. And that's why we're going to have real problems. But then you think about keeping rates so low, and your interest cost, say, is $250 billion a year, and the budget is $4 trillion X, right? You say, oh, that's not too big of a problem, right? Now, this particular year, it's $640 billion in interest on the debt, not the debt, paying the interest on the debt. This is becoming a real problem. And now, if we ever went back to borrowing at normal rates, 6%, let's say, on average, which is what 35 years of history tells us is normal, with a yield curve that's not inverted, not to get too complicated, we then will be paying 1.4 trillion roughly on interest. We don't have that money. So that's what happened. And back to the wars and everything. Yes, listen, I was in favor of the Iraq War. I was convinced that George Bush the younger would do what George Bush the senior did. Overwhelming military victory, leave. Instead, he didn't. That's why when I ran for the U.S. Senate, I was actually shocked by this one thing. I was the first person running for office or in office to call for Don Rumsfeld's resignation. Wow. And I said it not with like I hated the guy. I think he was a great American. He had a big background and smart guy. He just did a terrible job. So he should resign. And so, yes, there's a lot of things like that go on. So this is how it's really going to impact everybody. It's the interest on the debt that's growing too wildly that we can't really stop. So now the rock and the hard place comes. We can't go back to zero interest rates. Inflation would steam up because they'd be buying bonds and whatever, right? They'd be printing money, and we can't go back to 6%. So we're having a crisis now. This is why I'm running. So we need to do the things I'm talking about, like Social Security. We need to do the things I'm talking about with the Fed. The Fed has totally destroyed the middle class on purpose. And here's the thing I want you to understand. The Fed has this dual mandate, two mandates within one. They're supposed to keep inflation, now they think at 2%, which they failed, and keep unemployment low or employment high. These are like, and not to get back to LaSalle and Algebra 1 or Algebra 2, it's like you get these two equations with three unknowns and you can't solve. You can't solve this problem. The Fed never should have had a dual mandate. The reason they do, it took all the pressure off, at least till now, the United States Congress that doesn't do his job. The Fed takes care of all this stuff. And all the U.S. senators, including Rand Paul, sit there going, oh, thank you so much. So we could get the Fed back to 0% inflation as a target, and they know how to do it. And let the Congress and the president act appropriately by introducing budgets, right? By the way, at stevelaffey.com, at fixingamericamovie.com, there's like a 12-minute video where I balanced the budget back in 2012. Just watch it. It takes about 8 minutes. You won't like it. No one listening will like it. But isn't it time for someone to say what I said in a macrocosm, what I said in Cranston when I ran? The place is broke. Everybody's screaming. The Providence Journal has red letters on every article, Cranston financial crisis. And a guy comes back in after not living there for 20 years, but went to Cranston East Public School and says, listen, you're not going to like anything I'm going to do. But I didn't come all the way back to Cranston to live in Detroit. I'll fix it. You won't like it. And you'll thank me when I'm done. That's what I'm saying now. I'm saying that I'm the guy who makes hard decisions. If you want those made, I'm your guy. If you want to live in Crazyville and not touch Social Security, I'm not your guy. I'll go back and play with my 6 kids. I mean, I don't need to be here. I am a populist. I know what needs to be done. And people who know me know I don't mince words. I don't mince words. I don't have a great way of like placating people who say, oh no, what if I'm 53 and I get a little bit less than Social Security because I'm in both a new program and an old program? And I say, you might get less. But doesn't someone have, no, I don't think they will. What I'm saying is if someone else has a better plan to fix these giant problems, I'm in. But why don't we have a debate? I'd like to see a debate, one debate on one issue. If you lined up 15 people running for president and said, how would you balance the U.S. budget over 4 years? 14 would fall off the back of their chairs, and I'd be like, here's what we're going to do. So, by the way, I adopted Herman Cain's 999 plan. The existing tax system that everybody else wants to keep will never get enough money. We'll never raise enough money. A 999, half a flat tax, half a fair tax system, means that if we have some illegal aliens and they buy bubble gum, we're going to capture 9% of the price of the bubble gum. I hate to joke about it, right? But we have to change things to survive and prosper.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be a bad issue for regular working Americans that are paying sales tax, because their sales tax would be out of control, though?
For some people, they might pay a little bit more. For most people, they'll pay less. Now, we can always do things with people who fall below the poverty line. A whole nother problem in our country, which we don't want to get into it like today. It's one subject. But people getting out of poverty with the federal government over their heads, the federal government keeps pushing them down with enormous marginal tax rates as they try to get out of Social Security disability or Medicaid or housing. They make $1 extra, they lose a $1,200 a month housing voucher. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. That's why a 999 plan will keep the marginal rate at 9%. So if you climb out of poverty, keep 91% of what you make. Sure, you'll have to pay more, but we can't capture money from the underground economy unless we tax some consumption. The underground economy may very well be like $600 billion of lost revenue per year. I'm not blaming people in some respects for working at a bar for cash. I'm really not. Do whatever you got to do, folks. But we've got to capture this money for everybody. And here's the thing about the 999 program that Herman Cain found out.
I do want you to talk about the 999 plan and continue on that. And then I do want to move toward China and the debt that they own, as far as they own a lot of our debt, and also our dependency on China and how it's hurting the country.
To sum up the 999 plan, if you just look it up, it's a 9% tax on corporate income, very few deductions. They won't be buying tickets for Red Sox games and deducting silly stuff, right? It's a 9% sales tax and a 9% income tax. All together, and Herman Cain talked to me about this, it's half a flat tax and half a fair tax. And if you meet a really liberal person, tell them it's a little bit of a consumption tax or a wealth tax. Because if a guy buys a $100 million boat, in Rhode Island, he doesn't pay any taxes, right? Because there's a special boat tax, obviously. But if he buys a $100 million boat, we'll capture $9 million of his wealth. We're not going to capture people's wealth, really wealthy people, by the crazy stuff that Biden comes up with that he puts in budgets. That's never happening, wealth taxes per se. So I believe it's a system that raises a lot more money that people will like. And by the way, 75% of the people wanted it. That's why Herman Cain took off. All the complaints and all the Mitt Romneys telling him at a debate, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. That's just the establishment people, by the way. Rick Santorum, watch the 2011 debate. Them attacking Herman Cain as if he was a clown. He was a master's in math from Memphis State, a really smart man. He got it. I copied it. It's good. Again, one last thing before we get to China. Go to anybody's website like Nikki Haley and try to find a policy. Just try. There's nothing.
It's true. There's not much on a lot of these websites. It's pretty sad because it's all about talking points.
Right.
It's all about, and not to bring up President Trump, but build the wall. Mexico is going to pay for it. That's all good and dandy. But it's all a lot of silliness. And there's no, as you've been doing the whole conversation we've been on here, Maya, talking about in-depth policy proposals of what you want to do for not just Rhode Island, but also the country, because you're running to be president of the United States. So you've thought about this and put a lot of deep thought into it. Some of these people, they don't, they'll get in there, they hire their people, and they don't know what the hell they're doing.
Nikki Haley obviously said Social Security said she wants to raise retirement age. How far? She doesn't know. Actuarially, how much money does it save? She doesn't know. It's not really a presidential candidate. And this is the thing I'm trying to do, even if I can't win. Change the very nature of the debate for one reason. I come from the middle class, the lower middle class, quite frankly. The middle class has been destroyed. Every one of my programs does two things: restores the middle class, and especially for younger people. Younger people do not have the opportunities of the older people because we've destroyed it for them. They can't buy a home, right? We've destroyed it. People my age, not me personally, because I've been a populist fighting against this, but I've lost. So I'm trying to win so that young people can have a future. That's why I'm here. I have a plan to unify the middle class, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, on specific plans that may be tough to swallow for a couple of years, but will revitalize the growth of America and the middle class.
Yeah, let's talk about China as far as the aspects of how much of debt that they own, of our debt, and also the dependency. You know, I'll tell you, I go in the dollar store sometimes, and that place is jam-packed like no other. The parking lot is full. It's full to the gills in there, and people are buying all the cheap Chinese stuff. They're, getting all the cheap stuff in there. And, it's some of the stuff in there is good, but some of the stuff is a lot of junk.
Yeah.
Again, it's about rebuilding America.
Yeah.
And how do we do this and get away from China? Because we're really in cahoots with them, and it's sad.
Well, first of all, in 2005 and 2006, when I started speaking publicly about national things, I said we should not be trading with China. And elected to the U.S. Senate, I would try to stop and convince others. I wasn't running for president.
Right.
The Club for Growth, a giant, very good organization, but really into free trade, totally disagreed with me. Pat Toomey, who went to LaSalle and became a U.S. Senator later, and a friend of mine, haven't seen him in years, he argued with me about it because they were going to endorse me. But if you go read their endorsement of me, when they talk about free trade, I write no trading with China on the document. And they still endorse me because, number one, again, I'll be as short as I can. Free trade with the UK and Australia, great. Relatively same GDP per capita, allies. We can argue with Canada over milk supports, whatever, but free trade works. It also works if you just want to make bananas and we can sell you semiconductors. If you don't want to grow out of that and you want to make bananas, grow bananas, that's okay for us. Not so great for you in Guatemala or whatever, right? What it really doesn't work is when you have a communist country whose stated goal is to be the world superpower and destroy America. It's really not okay to enrich for the short-term chief executive officers of giant corporations like Walmart and Deere, who effectively became Chinese companies, right? Who made enormous profits, took manufacturing jobs from Rhode Island, not so much into Colorado, but across the Midwest, where I make the movie Fixing America, and go see these cities like Youngstown, Ohio. They're burnt out. And remember this, these are manufacturing jobs. So a manufacturing job is the best job to create in your city. It pays the most in taxes, and it creates the most other jobs, what we call multiplier effects. A manufacturing job is really 4 jobs. Remember, you open a manufacturing plant for cars to make Toyota cars in your state. I wanted Rhode Island to be a right to work state, so they would make them in Rhode Island, right? But then you've got to have ball bearings, you've got to have batteries, you've got to have someone serving Dell's lemonade, you've got to have someone showing up to sell them cookies. There's a lot of jobs created other than the jobs you hire for the factory. So that's why these manufacturing jobs have destroyed and hollowed out the middle class. So my program has always been, I wrote at Fixing America movie, I keep it up there. Go to the China section, see what I wrote in 2011. People may be catching on today. I'm the only candidate for president who told you exactly what would happen. China would become more of a despotism. It did. It would never become a republic by trading with them. How did I know that? Just because it's never happened before in the history of the world? Okay. Right? I mean, this stuff is so stupid. And here's what I want to tell you guys who are listening one more time. Everybody knew it. Nobody said it but me in 2005 and 6. It doesn't take a genius to say what I'm saying. It takes cojones to risk getting people ticked off and say what I'm saying. Now, you're talking to a guy who right now is not just today wearing an American-made tie, made in Vermont, a shirt made in Seattle, a belt made in Amish country, by the Amish Belt Company, I'm wearing a suit made by Hickey Freeman, $300 on Amazon, made in America, in upstate New York. Usually they cost $1,200. I'm cheap, right? I'm actually wearing a pair of jeans I won't even show you because I'm wearing a suit that's made by the All-American Clothing Company. I have 3 cars, 2 Ford Expeditions, one's a Max, one's an EL, and I'm outside. I have a car parked out there registered in Colorado, a Ford F-250. I do American stuff. I'm not just talking about it. This is what I do. So this is the great difference. Now, we really got it in a bad way now because nobody paid attention. Our trade deficit with China, even under Donald Trump, went up. It's now $380 billion a year. They're taking the profit on that of $80 billion, or 20% or so, and they're building up the military. So here's the good news. China imports 3/4 of its oil, right? We don't care what happens to the Saudi Arabian people in many respects because we got our own oil, right? They import most of their own food. We don't. So the risk for them is that we need to have a very strong Navy, as we always have, even stronger, to make sure if they do something wrong, we shut them down.
Yeah, but Steve, the problem is that the BRICS issue has come about with Saudi Arabia, China's involved, India's involved, all these countries, and they're making us look like fools right now because we have terrible leadership again with the Biden administration. But this has been going on for years upon years on end. The setup for the BRICS has started way before the Biden administration. So True. China's winning right now.
China's winning. Here's their problem. Their population, they have no babies. They've overcounted young people by 100 million. No one even wants to have a baby. The demographic is going to doom them like it did Japan in a worse way. And now, unfortunately for them, they've got one guy making all the decisions.
But Steve, wouldn't you say there's a problem too in the U.S. because we're not producing a lot of babies either due to economic issues and, inflation in general? Our baby percentages went down also.
Yes, nowhere near what's happening in Russia, what's happening in China, and what's happening in some of the Western European countries. But yes, now due to our immigration, whether you like it or don't like it, there are more people, right? So, and young people. By the way, this is the other thing I always thought should be true, and I said it publicly in 05 and 06. Having been down to Guatemala, a whole nother funny story, wonderful story of fire engines and stuff that we donated, and been across the border, not like, Vice President Harris doesn't even go to the border. President may look over at the border. Go look at an article about me going into Altar, Mexico, and seeing the problem. So I get it. It's a horrific situation. And if I were president, we would focus like a lightning rod on the countries to our south. All we ever do in this country is focus on, go pick up the paper, find an article about the Palestinians. If I see another article about the Palestinians, I'll throw up. I don't really want to hear about the Palestinians. They lost the war in 47. They want to live in abject poverty. When Israel gave them land, they smashed all the businesses into the ground. I'm not interested. I'm interested in Guatemala being a real country and people not wanting to come here. I'm interested in El Salvador. I'm interested in Mexico, actually growing their economy, trading with them, bringing the jobs that are in China. If they can't be in America, they can be in North America or Central America. We need to onshore these things. And by the way, this is all happening anyway. The problem with politicians is that they're always late. The end of globalization is over. It's over.
Yeah, but I just want to drift back, though, to the BRICS, because are you saying that you're not really worried about these coalition countries coming together?
I am
really?
Not.
Okay.
I am not as worried as I'm worried, but I'm not as worried as many people are. Okay. One, in order to have a world reserve currency, you have to have an enormous amount of currency. People have to want to fund this stuff. Now, in China, for example, you still can't buy their bonds. They're a communist country. They're never going to be the world's reserve currency. Now, can they play in other backgrounds? Of course they can. Does Brazil say, they have now a leftist leader of Brazil, that's terrible, who says, I want to do this with China? Yes, but it's very small. I mean, between us and the euro, it's 80% of all the transactions done in the world.
Yeah, but India's involved. India's growing leaps and bounds right now, along with China, along with Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of Brazil, as you stated. There's a lot of Mexico's talking that they might jump in here. There's a lot of moving countries here.
Mexico's not jumping anywhere, especially if we bring back the Monroe Doctrine, which John Kerry did away with. But India is a great example in that they're going to be a growing economy, and they're going to be our friends. They're already having skirmishes and bodies dead and fighting with China on the borders. They're not with the Chinese communists. So India can be a great buttress to that side of Asia, going into China. So a lot of these things are going to happen. I am not as pessimistic about that. That doesn't mean I'm not vigilant. Doesn't mean, by the way, we don't handle our debt problems. So for people to really understand what I mean by this, I am strong dollar Steve Laffey. So when inflation's at 0 and it's running at 7% in the UK, our currency gets stronger and more people want to use dollars. People will then want to invest in America. I'll give you an example. If I were president and 3 people with a great idea for a manufacturing concern were in Japan, and they had a 15% internal rate of return, they thought, and that would be good, and they're going to have this, whatever they're going to build, right? They're going to invest $50 million. And then one guy turns to the other guy and says, that guy Laffey's president of America. That guy's got a strong dollar. Why don't we build the plant there? Because the dollar is going to appreciate versus the yen by 3 or 4% a year. We'll have an 18% return. See, that's how currencies work. When people think the dollar is going to get stronger, what do they want? Investment in America. Even if they have to repatriate back to other countries. They want to be in the strong dollar. The only way we're going to get a strong dollar, I'm the only candidate I think who can bring you a strong dollar. And that's because we're going to keep inflation at 0. But yeah, there's a lot of worries. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of problems.
Well, I know you're a financial guy, and I have a good friend that I've interviewed on this program many times in the past. He talks to me, throughout the past, months, saying that, we're in for a crisis that could make the Great Depression look like a joke. Are you on that same wavelength, or do you believe that that's a fear-mongering tactic? I mean, we're seeing the crises in commercial real estate right now. It's getting really bad already.
Yeah. So yes, I would agree that the crisis, that's what, when I announced in my 30-second video, I say at 25 seconds, we're having a crisis now. I'm running because we're having a crisis. I mean, I'm the only guy who can fix it. Yes. For example, SVB Bank as one bank, right? Just take one bank. First of all, the people like Vivek who said we need to raise FDIC insurance over the weekend to $10 million an account, that's crazy talk. Again, he's a very smart man. Why would he say something so stupid? There's $150 billion in FDIC insurance that you pay for, people listening. When you put money in a bank, there's $23 trillion of deposits. You would never be able to insure $10 million per account, but that would only be for rich people.
Well, the question would be, well, what if all these banks that they're talking about that are not solvent? They're talking about hundreds of banks becoming unsolvent. If those banks tank, you're screwed. Yes.
People who have over $250,000 should be screwed. But so first of all,
but if you're losing hundreds of banks, I don't give a how much the FDIC has. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of banks. How could they even pay that back? Even if you're just a middle class guy that's maybe got 20, 30,000 in the bank.
Yes, you would get your deposits. Don't get me wrong, but yes. So the background on all of this is simply this. In 2008, when we bailed out the banks and kept their stocks from going to 0, by the way, very different. That's Hank Paulson, Secretary of Treasury, Goldman Sachs guy, President Bush, standing there in October, looking you in the eye, lying to your face, right? They saved their buddies at JP Morgan, the guy who runs it now, a billionaire. Stock should have went to 0. So people have to understand what they did to you. In return to the average American, they said, you know what we'll do? We'll take FDIC insurance from $125 per account to $250 per account. Who cares? Nobody. I mean, are you going to go drive down a road near LaSalle and say, who has $250,000 in a bag? Nobody did, right? So that they did that. They tell you these things that are so unimportant, but they say it just like, by the way, this debt ceiling. They come back and both parties say, well, we really solved this problem. They solved nothing. It was a whole game. I said it on Newsmax 3 weeks ago. Here's exactly what's going to happen. Some guys say, no. And what I say, Janet Yellen pushing back the date, this and that, all happens. And then they solve it, but they don't solve anything. But back to these banks, it's really critical. The banks in 2008, 5 banks had roughly 30% of the assets of America. Way too much, way too concentrated, way too big to fail. They passed a new law Dodd-Frank. What happened? Mr. Frank went broke with his bank, but anyway, right? He goes and joins a bank, and he's on the board of directors. These crazy, corrupt people. It's just corruption. Now these same 5 banks have 70% of your assets. Do you feel better? No, you feel worse. Like now they're way too big to fail. So the answer on my website is limited purpose banking. Banks need to be totally changed, be broken up, and be very small. The best loan that anybody ever makes in a bank is the one they actually know the person, right? The local bank knows Jimmy. Jimmy's father's a farmer in Mississippi. Jimmy wants a loan. He's been working on a tractor. They give him 50 grand. He puts in 10. Everything's happy. The worst loan are the ones they make where it's like, I don't know who these people are. Let's repackage it and sell it to Finland.
But my question is that if this happens and all these banks go under, we're talking about a lot of these community banks.
Yeah.
We're talking about the credit unions going down. Those are the banks that you're speaking about. And who's going to gobble up all the assets is the JP Morgan Chase.
Yes.
Bank of America. So, I mean, like
the way it's set up today, that's exactly what's going to happen. But if I'm president, it's not. But along the way, this is going to happen along the way to the end of 2024. A lot of this is going to happen. Why? Banks have really 3 big risks, right? We've seen the first one. It's called the interest rate risk. They take in lots of deposits that they earn nothing on. So they invested at 1% or 1.5% in 30-year treasuries. So they mismatch assets and liabilities. And then the 30-year treasuries go to 4 and they're totally broke. Because, not to bore people with the yield curve, but that's what happens. We still haven't seen really the deposit risk. The deposit risk is simply this. Banks have $100 million in the bank. They can lend out, they keep 15%. They keep 10%. Let's say 10%. They could lend out $1 billion. But go back to It's a Wonderful Life movie. Jimmy, your money's not here. Your money's over at Joey's, right? I mean, that's where it is. So because of that leverage, 15-to-1 leverage, when deposits flee, or if they were to flee, a run in the bank where they couldn't remember, he tried to give cash out. It's a perfect example. That's a deposit risk, what we really haven't seen. The third risk is simply what we saw in 2008, which is coming, the credit risk. They don't get paid back in their loans. So we need a whole nother system of banking, and banks need to be broken up. We can't have 5 banks with 70% of the assets. We need the biggest bank in America to have 0.1% of the assets of America. We need to bring back Bank of New England, Fleet Bank. I'm trying to think of ones in your area and so forth. But we can do that. But right now, the banking system is the most corrupt part of America. They are all in it together with the people who run the country, and I've got to change that. But in the meantime, I can't stop what's about to happen. I don't know how bad it's going to get. We're at the very beginning of a really bad time.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these banks are in cahoots with commercial real estate too. So that's,
Sure.
Then you spoke about it too. The credit card issue, the student loan issue, the defaults on those. I mean, it's going to get really bad. I want to be gracious with your time, and we'll definitely have you on again.
Yeah,
I just want to get into this last topic, though,
Sure.
And then we'll do a second part, and we'll talk about that off air. But regardless for that, let's talk about this issue because it's something that I got a lot of questions on, and I do want to bring this up. When we speak about inflation, it's still out of control. I know the Biden administration has their own numbers and they play with different numbers. As president of the United States, what kind of programs would you put in place to kind of push the inflation down? Are we talking about the 999 issue?
No.
Okay.
Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, a famous quote. It's always about money.
Okay.
So think about it. Tomorrow morning, they double the money supply in everybody's back pocket. Everybody.
We're talking about printing money then.
No, that's what let's just say that happened tomorrow
going to the
morning.
Fed and all that stuff.
So the timing of it would be really rich people get up early because they know it's coming and they buy stuff. And then the really poor people get up late and they get totally screwed. That's
Right.
what's been going on for many years. So, for example, when the Fed ran knowingly 8% inflation, when they said it was transitory and it wasn't, all these things they've said, right? In June of 2021, Chairman of the Fed, Powell, said that by the end of the year, inflation would be 3.5%. It was 7.2. These are huge misses. This is like me, seriously, like hitting a golf ball and hitting it 90-degree angle and smashing a kid in the head. It's like they should resign. So as I put people on the Federal Reserve Board, we get Congress to change its mandate, and they only can keep inflation at zero. How do they do that? They'll never be allowed to print money anymore. Never be allowed to buy mortgages and securities like they did, which I think is illegal, but that's a whole long story. I think what they did was illegal. I don't think they had any reason to do that. Their balance sheet went from 400 billion to 8 trillion. Ridiculous. So when they're forced to only do inflation at zero, we could follow rules like this, something called the Taylor rule. John Taylor, professor at Stanford, looking at different parts of the economy, inflation, output, and so forth. He would have had short-term interest rates, I think, at 5% before inflation went up. So there's ways to keep inflation at zero. But that's how the middle class thrives. Who thrives when there's inflation? Rich people. What do they own? A lot more stocks that get goosed up. They own a lot more silver and gold. And whether or not they, who make $1 million a year, have a $4,000 or $5,000 increase in energy costs, they couldn't care less. Guy making 75, he's screwed. That's who I'm fighting for. So we know how to do it. By the way, there's no magic to this. Money supply increases at like 2% a year. The economy grows at 2 or 3. Inflation stays at 0. That's all you do. Real simple.
Actually, let's just tag on with this one last question, then I'll really let you go and we'll firm this out. Last question, because we got this question a lot too, as a person that's involved in finance. With that said, we've talked about throughout this interview about the economy looks like it's heading into probably worse than a recession. I'll say it. I know some people don't agree with it. A lot of those people are living in dream worlds. Regardless of that, as far as investing, what would you tell the people listening right now as far as investing? Should they put the money in stocks? I'm thinking you're probably going to say no with that, especially if we have a bad recession coming up. Precious metals, treasury. What are we thinking for people that are listening? What should they do with their money? Should they put it under the bed?
By the way, it's what I do best. It's why I retired at 38 and didn't have to make. I mean, that's what I did. If you look at me in the 1990s, I was considered by the Wall Street Journal the best stock picker in America.
Wow.
Stocks are it's a Wall Street Journal. The best stock pickers are in Memphis. It's an article you can look up, a 2-page article. And where I ran the focus list for Morgan Keegan, we beat out Goldman Sachs by 2.5 times over 5 years. So I would say that I tend to think about these things like this. Stocks are very expensive today. So I'm not in too many stocks. Gold, silver, precious metals, platinum. Listen, a lot of platinum comes from Russia. We're not getting it anymore. A lot of palladium comes from Russia. A lot of commodities are in a lull period, but I think that the most likely, if I'm not president, situation that happens is that the Fed has to run inflation hotter and pretend it's not to pay off the debt and devalue dollars. And that means you are more likely to have a bigger percentage of your assets in precious metals and in hard things like real estate. Not real estate in Central Falls, real estate in like Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live, where I own 20 acres, the last 20 acres, it looks like, that can be developed. So not that anybody should run out and do these things today, but I think that obviously there are some stocks like that, I mean, if you want to specifically say, probably over a long period of time, again, don't buy it because I'm saying that I'm not giving out advice, but things like Alcoa Aluminum make things. And I think you're going to see an era coming forward that no one expects. The era of globalization and making stuff in China is over, whether I'm president or not. The trend is going to be to make it back in America. So what can we make well? How do we ship stuff? Who's in charge of LNG to ship it to other countries? These are the kind of companies I would look at that will do well. Now, things that have had a giant run up, I don't buy anymore. I look for things My style, and again, it's not the style that works that well right now, although it's worked okay for me, is I buy things that get really beaten up, that have had a bad couple of years. And then I look at the trend. I'll give you one example. I'm not always right. When I started buying oil stocks, it was a day that a man on CNBC, a very well-known guy, Jim Cramer, said they were uninvestable. That day I bought. Not because he's wrong or a bad guy. He's actually probably a very smart guy. The sentiment was so bad that oil stocks were like, I'll make this up because I don't have it in front of me, usually 7, 8%, 12% of something like that of the S&P 500. They were like 2. Now they're like
What year was this around? Do you remember?
It would have been 2019.
Oh, okay.
October of 2019 or so. So, again, I look for things also that I come across. I hate to sound like Peter Lynch, but we got involved in milking cows, honest to God. And I go to the National Dexter Cow Show, and I see that these A2 milk cows, ones that have A2 milk, I knew nothing about it. I'm trying to convince people that they're getting $2,000 more. I make my entire small herd. I know this sounds crazy that I have cows, but because I'm from Rhode Island, right? And I grew up next to a gas station on Shore Avenue. But we buy these cows, and I make them all A2 milk. But more importantly, I look where the stock is, only in New Zealand. I buy this A2 milk company. No one can even buy it. Stay up late at night. It doesn't trade in America. It doesn't trade in Australia. It's like 25 cents. It went to like $10. So,
wow.
But that's because I saw a trend. Now, I can't tell you right now I see any because but it's something I keep one of the things, if you noticed about me, this is a total side thing. If we went into a restaurant together, because I was an investment banker, because I helped create, some of these companies, right? In a sense, right? Raising money. I'm very caustic about everything, like a hotel. Should I invest? Something's going wrong here with the food. I think this way. And once in a while I find something. I suggest people, lots of times you make money in things you really know. Specific knowledge for people out there listening is way better than general knowledge for the most part. Yeah. If you really, say for example, you're listening, how do I invest my money? And you own 2 dry cleaners and you're really good at it. Own 8. That's way better than the stock market. That's my real advice. Like, what are you good at? Because whatever specific knowledge you really have, you should accentuate it and grow and grow. And no matter what it is, examining diamonds, it could be anything, right? Delivering parcels. That's how you make money. And reinvest in that rather than worry about some stocks like I do. That's where I come from. I'm a stock trader from Payne Weber, yelling, screaming, throwing phones around.
I'll tell you what, Mayor Laffey, it's been an honor and privilege to do part 1 with you today.
Let's do it again.
We've never spoke before. And I'll tell you what, the knowledge you've put out to me and the people listening when they do listen to this is incredible. And you know what? You're a regular guy. You're not a bullshitter. You tell it like it is. I respect that. I think America's looking for that. That's why they voted for Trump, because they were sick of the politicians that were very prepared, reading the teleprompters like Obama, like Hillary Clinton. And that's why they wanted a straight shooter like Trump. I have my problems with Trump. We're not going to go into that right now.
Trump had no real advisors. I have no real advisors in a sense, right? I drive my own pickup truck to meetings. He's a very, very wealthy guy. But I'm a man of the people. I'm a populist. I truly believe that I could get 17 people walking down the street to run the Fed Reserve better than the people who are the highfalutin economists. I believe that. That's why I'm a populist. A populist means that he thinks that an average person walking down the street can do just as good a job as some of these elites or better, because the average people I meet in the street know that we don't want inflation. They're not going to make excuses about it. You get me a 74-year-old guy who came through the school of hard knocks, who didn't even go to college, and I explained to him about money. He's like, all right, Mayor, I could be on the Fed. We won't have inflation. That guy would go to me and say, we're not doing that. Right? Instead of the group think, and they have to have every week, right? At the Fed. We can change this. And I think I'm going to take off. I don't know how far I get, but I'm going to keep going because the country needs this message.
Yeah, and I agree with you because you know the issues clearly and you know them inside and out. And a lot of these people, men and women that are on TV running in the primary, whether it's Democrat or Republican, They're just up there saying the same cozy, nice words and the stuff they hear on Fox News every 10 seconds. They're just placating to the audience. And we don't want somebody that's doing that. We want somebody that's going to tell the truth, however hard it is to listen to. And that's what you've been doing throughout this podcast. So I appreciate you coming on today.
Let's do it again.
And let's do this again, and we'll firm that out in just a minute. But again, for people listening, Mayor Steve Laffey here. Again, it's stevelaffey.com. He's got the movie, it's Fixing America. Definitely check that out. It's on Amazon. You can find out more about it on his website also. And he has a Substack. Before we end, can you just tease the Substack a little bit before we cut loose, Mayor?
Hey, yeah, just go to stevelaffey.com and hit the Substack. You get something from me every day that's like 1 or 2 minutes. You don't have to even know what Substack is. Go to stevelaffey.com, hit the donate button. That'd be great. Hit the issue button too. But there's a Substack button, and I put out something every morning. It'll take you a minute, and you'll go, whoa, like the stuff about money supply. Hit the Substack button. I'm Steve Laffey at Substack, whatever, but it's really at stevelaffey.com. Everything's there, and there's 100 hours. If you're really bored, there's hundreds of hours of me talking about. You want to know about Ariel Sharon in Israel? I got an hour for you. I'm not saying you really want to do that, but I put everything I do is on the record. I don't try to hide it. And when I'm wrong, I say, you know what, I really screwed that up. But I'm not wrong about what's happened in America. I'm not wrong. I'm the most qualified guy to be president. We have a big chasm to cross about name recognition. Thank God for the internet.
Yeah, you ain't kidding.
Fire breathing Rob.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's more people. Thank you for that, Mayor. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people that are listening to these podcasts and radio shows now, and that's the way to get the name out. Most people are not listening to the mumbo jumbo on the mainstream media because it's just, as President Trump said in the past, it is fake news. It's all about where they're getting the money from, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies or the oil companies or whatever companies they're getting that funding from. That's who they're placating to. We don't do that there. I just let you come on, speak your piece, ask you questions, and we go back and forth, and that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yep.
But regardless of that, man, go ahead.
I have not watched the TV show on news in 7 or 8 years.
Right.
Not one. People send me clips, of course. I get my Federal Reserve news from the Federal Reserve. I get raw data. Now, I'm not saying everybody can do that, but people are consuming way too much time on these major networks.
Well, it's become wrestling now.
Yes,
it's red versus the blue, like it's a football game. And
right.
I'll leave you with this, and then we'll really cut the game here. But I was listening to my old advisor. I did political science down in Boca Raton in South Florida, and I was listening to a meeting on YouTube, and the woman said, this was during COVID. They were doing the Zoom, and she said, "Go blue," and they're saying, "Yeah," and I'm thinking, it's not go blue or go red. Like, this is not the country is. We've talked about this on many podcasts that, I'm not a Bush guy, but during 9/11, he brought the country together. Sure. And, COVID was a time where I thought we would come together. It wasn't. It was, if you don't like Trump, you're an anti-vaxxer. And and if you're for Trump, you're a racist and a sexist and everything else. It's just disgusting what's going on in the country right now. We need somebody like you to bring us together, and that's just going to tell the truth. And I'll end there. Again, Mayor Laffey, stevelaffey.com. Thanks so much for coming on, Mayor.
Thank you, sir.